Hello everyone, and Shavua Tov. We are beginning a new week and a new series, and that new series is going to be about what's coming in a week, and that is the Yom Tov of Shavuos. Indeed, 30 days before Pesach, the Shulchan Aruch paskins that you're supposed to learn the laws of Pesach, but the Be'er Heitev says, in the name of many poskim, that this is true regarding every Yom Tov. So we're within those 30 days. So since Shavuos has no unique halachos with it, I think it's a great time to give a refresher about Yom Tov in general. And indeed, everybody knows that Yom Tov is different than Shabbos if it comes out on a weekday because you're allowed to cook. And the question is, how do you view that? Is that a heter, or is that actually the essence of the day? It's lechatchila. If you look in the Torah in Parshat Bo, when God tells us about the Yom Tov of Pesach, he basically says, Kol melacha lo yaseh bahem, you're not allowed to do any of the malacha, like Shabbos. But there's one exception. Asher ya'achel l'chol nefesh, u'levado yaseh lachem. But food is allowed. But that's not exactly the way the Torah presents it later on in Parshat Emor. In Parshat Emor, when it talks about the Yom Tovim, it talks about each Yom Tov, and when it comes out on a weekday, indeed, the Torah says, Kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu. It doesn't say all malacha is not allowed except for food, but rather it says, Yom Tov is a day in which only melechet avodah is not allowed. And indeed, when you read the famous Mishnah in Masechet Megillah that says, Ein bein Yom Tov leShabbat, there's no difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos, Ela ochel nefesh bilvad, except for the preparation of food, the question is, how do we view it? Does that mean that basically Yom Tov is like Shabbos with one heter, or no? Actually, it's a totally and utterly different day. And we find this is a machlokes aposkim. The Shagas Aryeh, the famous Rav Aryeh Leib, who was a Rosh Yeshiva in so many places in Lithuania, eventually was the Rav in Metz in France. His years, 1695 to 1785, Lundish throughout his responsum, comes along and basically says that there's a heter to make food on Yom Tov because of the mitzvah of Simcha. And he proves it. He says there must be a mitzvah of Simcha on Rosh Hashanah, because if there wasn't a mitzvah of Simcha on Rosh Hashanah, then you wouldn't be allowed to prepare food on Rosh Hashanah. But he acknowledges that there's a different point of view. And the other point of view is the Ramban. When the Ramban looks at the psukim in Parshat Emor that says, Kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu, he quotes Rabbeinu Hananel and says, ultimately, Perush melechet avodah, those words means, melacha mishtameret la'avodat kinyan, kegon zriya v'ktzira v'chafira v'kayotze bahem. The only things that are not allowed on Yom Tov are things that you do and you keep for many days. So, for example, you harvest your wheat and you put it in storage. Aval ochel nefesh eina melechet avodah. But preparation of food is not part of melechet avodah. In other words, the day of Yom Tov is a day in which only melechet avodah is not allowed, and that does not include food at all. You don't need a heter called simcha in order to allow it. It's not included at all. And from this perspective, Yom Tov is different than Shabbos. This comes down to a practical difference that we find at the beginning of the third perek in Masechet Beitza. And I learned this with Mori V'Rabbi Rav Lichtenstein in the year 1999. Unfortunately, I had mono that summer, and I was in and out of shir because mono makes you sleep a lot. But this year I was in, and I learned this originally with Rav Lichtenstein, and I'd like to quote him and the way he explained it. Indeed, the Mishnah says at the beginning of the third perek in Masechet Beitza, Ein sadim dagim mina bibarim b'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to go ahead and fish out of the nets on Yom Tov. And the question is why? Comes along Rashi and basically says that even though you're allowed to prepare food on Yom Tov, which would lend itself to doing shchita, slaughtering the animal, and of course, afiyah bishul, cooking and with water or cooking in your oven, that's only mishum de'ivshar mi'erev Yom Tov. It's only because you can't do it from Erev Yom Tov. In his time, there was no refrigeration. So therefore, he says, Shchita chayish lemachmer bisra. If you shecht on Erev Yom Tov, and you have a day of Yom Tov a day later, let's say for lunch the next day, the meat will go bad. And yitchamem v'yasriach. Aval tzeidah. But taking fish out of the water, no problem. Put it in a fish bowl, and it will be fine the next day. So there's no reason to do it on Yom Tov. In a word, according to Rashi, the only time you're allowed to prepare food on Yom Tov is if you cannot prepare the food from Erev Yom Tov in such a way that it will still be delicious on Yom Tov. But today, refrigeration and whatnot, not to mention freezers, probably would negate all cooking on Yom Tov, according to Rashi. Rashi's not alone. Many generations later comes along the Maharil, the famous Maharil Rav Yaakov Mulin, his years 1360 to 1427. He was a Rav in Magenza, Germany, was one of the most important Ashkenazic poskim. Many of our minhagim all come in the Ashkenazi world from him, not to mention he was the teacher of many of the great rabbis of Ashkenaz, like the Maharivayil and others. He comes along and basically says the same thing. He says, in the name of the Maharash, Kol davar ochel nefesh nami sheino mefik ta'amo, asur lasota b'yom tov, defshar lasota mi'erev yom tov. At the end of the day, the only food you're allowed to prepare on Yom Tov is food that won't go bad if you do it a day earlier. So if the food goes bad, if you do it a day earlier, you're allowed to cook it on Yom Tov. But if the food doesn't go bad, like with refrigeration and freezers, then you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov. So therefore, according to the Maharil, French fries, which ultimately, if you don't serve it fresh, it becomes soggy and not so good, that you're allowed to prepare on Yom Tov. But chicken, you can prepare a day before. It's still delicious the next day, and therefore you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov. But Tosfot disagrees with Rashi, and later, of course, the Maharil's point of view. Tosfot on that Gemara comes along and says that Ein lechalek be'ochel nefesh ben efshar lasotam erev Yom Tov le'i efshar ela dafka b'machshirin yesh chiluk lekach. The only time that you have to worry about something that you can do from erev Yom Tov are things that are not preparation of food directly, but what we call machshirin, such as sharpening the knife in order to cut the meat. That you can do from erev Yom Tov. But the preparation of food itself, that's 100% allowed on Yom Tov. So as we could see, this machlokes of how to view Yom Tov, is it you're not allowed to prepare food, but there's a matir, there's a heter called simcha that allows you to do it, or no, it was never disallowed, quote unquote. Excuse me for making up that term. In the first place, comes down to a machlokes between Rashi and Tosfot about preparation of food. According to Rashi, the only food you're allowed to prepare is food that's going to go bad if you don't prepare it on Yom Tov. But according to Tosfot, food was never something that was disallowed on Yom Tov. Melechet avodah means everything but food. And therefore, it's not a heter, it is actually the essence of Yom Tov. You come to Yom Tov, there is only 36 out of the 39 that are not allowed. And from this perspective, he's not alone. The Ran says the same thing. When it comes to food itself, it's not something that was not allowed at all. It was always allowed. So at the end of the day, lahalacha, how do we paskin on this? It's a machlokas Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. The Shulchan Aruch comes down on the side that says there was never something that was disallowed, and basically he says, Kol melacha asura b'Shabbat asura b'Yom Tov chutz mimelechet ochel nefesh. But the Ramah comes along and brings the position of Rashi yesh machmirin afilu ba'ochel nefesh atzmo kol sheino mefik tam klal. So any food that, if you make it a day early, it's still delicious, or as delicious as if you would prepare it fresh on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to prepare it on Yom Tov. I believe that even though this is a machlokes Shulchan Aruch and Ramah, which would have lent itself to Ashkenazim against Svardim, I think Am Yisrael has paskined this question. And Am Yisrael has paskined that preparation of food is 100% allowed on Yom Tov. And therefore, it's common in Israel to have barbecues on Yom Tov. It's common in many places to make fresh food on Yom Tov, and we don't go ahead and pedantically say, hey, is this something we could have made from Erev Yom Tov and still be delicious or not? And it's part of the, I would say, experience of Yom Tov. And allow me to end with the words of the Rambam. Indeed, the Rambam, when he talks about not food, about carrying, he comes and says that carrying was allowed on Yom Tov. Why? Even though you could do it from Erev Yom Tov, you can transfer a key from one place to another, you can transfer the wine that you need for the meal from one place to another in Erev Yom Tov, and it doesn't take away the taste. He says, that basically Yom Tov is a time in which you can come in and out, bring things from here to there, and you don't have to feel, like on Shabbos, that your hands are tied. And that is the experience of Yom Tov. From this perspective, allow me to just add one little postscript about davening. But don't hear it from me. My esteemed colleague, Rabbi Eli Fisher, said it, I think, beautifully. And that is that the davening should indeed reflect the difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. It should not be a regular Shabbos nusach. It should be a Yom Tov nusach. Let's hear his words in order to make it crystal clear.
I don't know if I'm not a nusach geek, but nusach is part of what makes a Yom Tov, right?
Sure.
At the beginning of Pesach, but he davened for the Yamud and he did Shabbos nusach, and is there anything wrong? Is there anything and I was trying to goad him on by doing the right nusach before he does, but he just kept on trucking. He even did at the end of Kaddish. He was like, and I'm
it's painful.
It was painful, and I felt Baruch Hashem, the Seder, we only had one. The Seder was great, but when I got home after Marav, I felt like I'd been gypped.
Yes.
So indeed, if Yom Tov is different than Shabbos, and cooking is part of the essence of Yom Tov, it should also reflect itself in the davening. Davening is different. Even though the words may be the same in parts of davening, same Birkos Kriyat Shema, we should definitely change the nusach when it comes to Ma'ariv as well.